7, 8 years old. She started a church. They put the minister out, Andy, because he married a young girl. Some women had planned to, already had, plans for him, and he disappointed them. So he had to go. Yeah, because they invested a lot of money in clothes and hats and things, and they would march around and put in collection. And he ignored all that, So he had to pay a price. And so my grandmother said, no, let's don't do that kind of thing. All right, we'll start a new church. And here's what she did. She started what you call circles. And she would go to a person's house, and they would invite their family members and friends and neighbors, and they would sit and read the Bible, and then they'd have discussion. I only thought about this when I was a sophomore in college, what was happening. After they had the discussion, then they start sharing with each other on a very intimate basis some of the issues and problems they were dealing with. Okay? Well, it was group therapy. That's what was going on. And she managed that, and then she would get those people in there to go to their individual homes, invite other people, new people. So it got to be about 10 or 12 circles. And then they brought them all together, and that became a church.
So they call that community organizing.
Exactly. And my grandmother taught me that. I saw it happen. So I felt very comfortable when we got into places like Selma, Alabama. It was very resistant. But what we did was continue to talk to people. As Andy said, I put it in this term, that violence is the language of the inarticulate. So what you have, people have to share it with each other and get people talking. That's exactly what happened. And I have a book that I wrote that's called In Peace and Freedom, My Journey in Selma. And it details how you go about organizing a community that's a closed society and resistant. And that's what we found in Selma, Alabama. So in being able to move, and the other thing is, you have to have a message. But the message is for the people themselves to take leadership. And when people have the problem, the question is, how do you get them to move? Because you can't go around and organize everybody. And I don't do that. That's what I do. I simply bring people together who want to be trained how to go about that. And that's why we have the centers all over the country. I want to say this because it's not publicly known. And Andrew Young, it's funny to me because I had to explain to him that he was the one that's responsible for the U.S. Institute for Peace, the one in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Institute for Peace came out as a result of Elise Boulding and some others having some meetings together, and we wanted to form a peace academy. We said the federal government ought to have a peace academy, okay? And so therefore, we want to have a Department of Defense, so let's have a peace academy. And so they started working with it. Jim Lowy from St. Louis was one of the others. So what happened is that Andrew Young was in Congress during that period, and he's the one that presented the bill to establish this U.S. Institute for Peace. And that's why it was, and it got passed. That was a strategy that we used to get this bill passed that I don't think Andy knows about. But what we did was have hearings all over the country. We set up hearings and invited congressmen from those areas to come and hear what the people had to say. And we sent the bill out, and they testified about the bill. And so all those people got to realize that this thing was very viable, and our country needed to have a peace academy. They didn't call it an academy. They called it the U.S. Peace Institute for Peace, which was really good. But that's another contribution that Andy made along the way, even when he was in Congress. And he'd forgotten about it, y'all.
Well, one of the reasons I didn't pay any attention to it was that Jimmy Carter took me out of the Congress and sent me to Africa. And basically, the desegregation, the decolonization of Southern Africa came right out of the Martin Luther King playbook. And so that's Namibia and Zimbabwe and ultimately South Africa. And that process basically was on an international level. And it wasn't that we did it so officially. When I went, President Carter said, I want you to talk to African leaders about what we can do to help them. Well, when I got to South Africa, the State Department lined up all of the black folk and the white liberals and said, these are the people we want you to meet with. I said, well, they're not the problem. They said, well, who do you want to meet with? I said, who is the meanest SOB you got here? And I said, and they told me, P.W. Botha. I said, I need to see him. And they said, why would you want to see him? I said, because he's the problem. If we can understand what his problems are, we can deal with them. And it was very simple because he agreed to see me. And the first thing he said was, why did white people vote for you? He knew I had been elected in a majority white district. I answered that. How much into marriage? Not much, a little bit here and there, but really not a. Okay, how long do you think we have before the bloodbath? I said, what bloodbath? He said, surely these people are going to rise up and kill us the way we've treated them. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know Mandela, but I know Bishop Tutu and I know Oliver Tambo. I said, but wait a minute, remember, Gandhi started here in South Africa, and he went to India and liberated India, and I don't think they killed a single Englishman. And I said, that's what President Carter sent me here to find out. If you want us to help you, we can help you avoid a bloodbath, because I really think all black people want is one person, one vote. And if you vote and we have a democracy and free enterprise that's somewhat fair, you won't have a bloodbath. He didn't answer me, he just said, But I knew exactly what their fears were. And that's how we began to, and actually, Julius Nyerere knew what their fears were. And he said, no, we're not ready to bother South Africa yet. He said, if we work with Zimbabwe and Namibia, the South Africans will have to get to know us. And they'll get to know us and they'll trust us, and it'll be easier to deal with them. I mean, there was an instinctive nonviolence in Africa that we tied into. Now, I guarantee you that exists today in Korea. It exists in Iran. It exists in the Palestinians. It exists in Israelis. And there could be peace on earth if we dealt with people's fears and insecurities instead of exacerbating them.
South Africa, yes. While the election was going on in South Africa with Nelson Mandela, there were controversies among different tribes and ethnic groups and political groups, and they would stand up with rifles as the people lined up to register to vote for the first time in their lives, and these people would gun them down. And these were black on black, I'm talking about, okay? Mrs. King got a grant from USAID, my government, and Charles Alford and I went down to South Africa, and we had to, Tiwani was already there, and we asked him to pull together all of these different tribes and the leaders, the grassroots leaders. We took them through about 10 days of intensive training in nonviolence, and they represented different groups, there in South Africa. When we finished with them and we sent them back into the community, they laid down their weapons and started working together in teams. Instead of shooting each other, they were actually working together to get people registered. So that was ending the internal strife between them. And Buthelezi, who had been holding out, realized that his grassroots people were working with the other grassroots folk and other tribes and everything, and that sort of made him come on in to join in with Mandela. So when you think about what Martin Luther King's teachings have done, we can't even account for all of the places where Martin Luther King's teachings and his symbol have really helped to transform people. And this is little known, and Andy knows a lot about that too.
Well, I think that's exactly one of the reasons we want to continue to have this conversation, but we do want to bring it back to the U.S. and Georgia and the struggles that we still have in this area. So, Nisha, let's see what are our young leaders now doing with this legacy?
Yeah, certainly. So a lot of what we're hearing were successes from the early period, was that the different groups of the nonviolence approaches from the People's Campaign were able to see the other. They were able to speak the other's language, right? And that allowed them to then feel comfortable and engaged with the individuals that they were in essence fighting against or ignoring. That's one way that we were able to see progress, because we were able to speak the other's language. I think using the numbers that we are able to show today in whichever representation we use is another way that we're able to speak the language of decision makers and people who are writing policies and making decisions on the amount of resources that are going to different places. And so in our second panel, focusing on 2000 to 2018, we're going to speak to Park Cannon and Mary Hooks. Let me introduce both extremely intelligent and impactful young ladies. Representative Park Cannon is the youngest member of the Georgia House of Representatives. She is excited to represent Midtown, Downtown, and Southwest Atlanta. At the 2016 Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, Representative Cannon said, "We need to trust Black women, and will continue to stand up for LGBTQ and minority visibility in the South." Park serves on the executive committee of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, the nation's largest state Black caucus, is the chair of the Civil and Human Rights Committee, as well as the co-chair of Communications. She serves on Insurance and Small Business Development House Committees, City of Atlanta Delegation, Fulton County Delegation, Bipartisan Future Caucus, and is the secretary for the Women's Caucus. She does sleep, even though she does all of these other services. Mary Hooks is the co-director of the Southerners on New Ground, otherwise known as SONG. SONG is a regional queer liberation organization that serves as a Southern refuge for LGBTQ people, people of color, differently abled people, undocumented and documented immigrants, and working class people. Mary's commitment to Black and LGBTQ liberation is rooted in her experiences growing up under the impacts of the war on drugs. And her organization's mandate is to avenge
the mandate for Black people.
Yes, the suffering of marginalized ancestors, to earn the respect of future generations, and to be transformed in the service of the work, the direct work. And so please join me in welcoming Representative Park Cannon and Mary Hooks. And so ladies, will you speak a bit more about your background and the work being done now through your organizations and the role that you play?
Well, thank you, and good evening and peace to you all. I want to thank the elected officials who were in the room or have been in the room. If you've departed, thank you for spending some time here this evening. It is absolutely my pleasure and honor to be here today to reflect on the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not only as a third-generation member of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, but to really share this stage with Ambassador Andrew Young has made me smile. And Dr. Bernard Lafayette, thank you so much. Your leadership and your vision for human rights has been unparalleled, and I want to make sure that you know the young leaders understand that. I am a product of the Albany Poor People's Campaign. I was born at Phoebe Putney Hospital and live right here in the city of Atlanta and get to ride down your street every day. So thank you again. But the legacy is truly the legacy of Atlanta, and it moves national from there. I believe it's a legacy of a dream that we do realize every day, but we do have a lot more work to go. Unfortunately, our country was founded on inequality, and it extends to every person, every color, every creed, every religion. That is not what they founded it on. So our measure, I believe, is this. It's been 50 years since Dr. King was taken from us. In that time, in the state of Georgia, we are standing on the shoulders of some giants, but unfortunately, the bell tower that we need to climb to ring out our freedom song is still many stair steps away. My grandparents lived here through Georgia their whole lives, moved up to Atlanta. Their whole generation focused on loving each other, on bringing some sort of torch of justice to shine a light on the evils of racism in our country. And that's why I'm here, because now I understand that I have to pick that torch up. It is not a choice, it is a mandate, as Mary has already spoken to. So as we look beyond these explicit racisms and biases and people who are unwilling to acknowledge that we do not all start out in life with equal resources, assets, or opportunities, and pulling ourselves up by our quote-unquote bootstraps is not what is going to get us there, I wanted to come and speak with y'all today. So this invitation to be here to share with you alongside my comrade Mary Hooks, as young leaders to pick up this torch is a responsibility. It takes a lot of time, and I think we have a long way to go to write this next chapter. So I will publicly submit that we are open. We are vessels. Please speak through us. Please speak to us. Please share your stories with us and do not stop. I do believe that if we are on our way to progress and we fail, failing is just the first attempt in learning. So let's fail. I'm ready. We have nothing else to lose. Progress to me represents the communities where everyone is at the table, where folks can get world-class educational opportunities, where Black and brown bodies are not disproportionately affected or targeted by law enforcement, and where trans and non-binary folks can use the restroom in peace. Come on. Our commitment to workers' rights should be strong here in the state of Georgia, but we're still a right-to-work state. So in order to live out our mandates, I really do think that some of the institutions need to continue to step up to the plate. One of those institutions is where I serve, Georgia State Capitol, the Gold Dome. There are many people in there who have made their wealth by climbing up a ladder and pulling up the ladder behind them. There's subtle tactics. These aren't the things that you're seeing out loud, but they do have the effect of robbing us and setting us back even further. These are tactics like tax code changes and traffic violations being misdemeanors. These are predatory home loans and labor laws that do not help us. So, as was spoken to, when my colleagues and I try to say end homelessness in the state of Georgia, unfortunately, many of the folks who have created homelessness are serving with me. So, although we know that institutional inequality is insidious, and that we'll be told that we're playing a race card if we start to talk about some of these issues, I submit to us that we bring our deck of cards if it's going to be a race card. I submit that if we're going to be special snowflakes, as some people call us, then we become a blizzard. I do not believe that silence is our option. And so, as I close out tonight, before we continue moving on, I just want you to know that we do want a kinder world. We do want a more peaceful environment. And right now, while we're ideating and we're resisting, we are trying to listen to what y'all have done and want to continue to be poured into. So thank you for hearing me out tonight. You got it.
All righty, friends. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me into the space. Thank you for everybody who could have been choosing to do something else. You decided to spend your evening here. What does that say about you? Something awesome, I think. Again, my name is Mary Hooks. My people are from New Albany, Mississippi, and Tuskegee, Alabama, and migrated north to Wisconsin. My grandfather ran away, 12 years old, to get jobs in the factory. And my mother's side of the family, my actual great-great-uncle fled Mississippi because he was a black gay man during those times, and created the pipeline for my family to come north. And the result of that, because systemic racism, which is what I think is the critical conversation, showed up, in terms of the North in a very particular way. And so in Wisconsin, where currently they incarcerate about 90-something%, I believe, of black men between the ages of 18 and 35, my family was definitely caught up in that booby trap. And most of the men and women in my family, bodies, as they're aging, bodies are breaking and broken because they've worked on hard factory floors for years. And so those are my people. And I always like to try to start that off so folks have a lens or understand my perspective and how I'm coming. So I'm also coming representing the dangerous homosexuals in the South, as we like to call ourselves, who have been working on the front lines of racial and economic justice for 25 years. And I just want to shout out to Joan Garner, who was one of the founders, Commissioner Joan Garner, who was one of the founders of our organization. I think my notes are kind of bananas. And so as an organization that is what we like to say is currently a part of this iteration of the Black liberation struggle, right? Which has started when the first black person got off the boat. We have always been in a resistance. There has always been resistance happening. Movements has always been happening. So obviously we're like 1950, whoa, there's so much more. But I understand we have to start somewhere in terms of measuring where we've come from and where we're headed. And so I think that there's a lot of things that's stirring in my brain right now. And so there's God, I'm like, whoa, do I start here? I mean, y'all should see this mess here. But just some of the things that's on my heart, I just want to, honor the movements that came and was birthed out of the civil rights movement. We have to allow space for the American Indian movement, the Stonewall Rebellion that kicked off the queer liberation movement. We have to name the Black Power movement and the work of those elders, the organizing that took place in the 80s around the AIDS crisis, the organizing that happened around the universal health care in the 90s, the Zapatistas Rebellion, the environmental justice movement that also kicked up in the 90s. And I feel like as we, the anti-apartheid movement, which was also named, I just want to name that continuum of work and that we're building on, particularly focusing in on the Black feminist work. And woman, one would say womanist or feminist, tomato, tomato, depending on how you slice it. Black women were organizing and building a politic that had a vision along with it, and one that said we want to live in a world, essentially, that we can bring our full selves to the table, understanding that our lives and our struggles are deeply connected, as well as the systems of oppression are connected. And so the ways in which we build movements necessitates that we build unified struggles across movements in order to build the power we need to address the systemic racism that's taken out our people. I think what we have the challenge in this time is to convince our people that there is still a war happening on our lives. Unfortunately, we have been told that we're in a post-racial society. We drank the Kool-Aid when Obama came on the stage, and and it was a lie, and it is a lie. And so just in case somebody came in here with that, I'm just sorry to break it to you like this, but it's not the truth. And so we actually have an invisible monster that rears its ugly head when we see a black body laying in the street. But this ugly monster, the lynchings that happens in courtrooms, the lynchings that happen in prisons, the lynchings that happen every time our folks go to apply for Medicaid and they're denied because folks refuse to expand it. State violence is rearing its ugly head. And so I just want to name that as part of the challenge that we're up against, is to convince a world and convince our people that we have a fight that is still before us. And I also am thinking about the movement of nonviolence and the posture of nonviolence. And I think that oftentimes when we talk about it, it is about the changing of behaviors between individuals and how we engage each other, how we deal with conflict. But I think we are also challenged to think about a movement of nonviolence necessitates that we demand abolition of jails and cages, which are inherently, the institutions are inherently violent, and they produce violence. And so unless we call for that, regardless if we change behavior, the institutions within itself continues to perpetuate and develop violence. Yes, no?
Yeah.
Raise your hand. Yeah. Amen? Come on, saints. We're in the church. Call a response. And so I think part of the movement and vision that we have as folks who are organizing in this time is to understand that a world that we are in desperate need of, a world that figures out a way to handle the ills in our communities without caging people, that doesn't rely on cages and the police state to address the symptoms, I should say the side effects of a broken social safety net and a canceled social contract. We have deployed a carceral solution, thinking that a racist, violent state actually has any interest in resolving the problems that they profit from. And we're wrong if we think that that is what we can, that is the intention. The system is working perfectly, right? And so our work and our policy should, our strategies have to make sure we are moving an inside game. We see you. Yes, an inside game has always been critical. And we also have to have an outside game, because the grassroots and that work of organizing everyday people to fight for their lives is where the expertise of solutions come from, right? And we have to draw lines in the sand so that we never get so comfortable with the negotiations and the piecemeal deals and the crumbs that they shed and call it progress. We can never get comfortable with that. So we have to keep a rigorous, vibrant movement. Even when they call us unlovable brats, we'll take that too. No shade, but I'm being honest, right? That's real. And so I want to talk about that some more, because this is our responsibility and this is our mandate. And the third way, again, inside, outside, and away. We actually aren't just about, shutting down highways and, getting rid of the police. We actually have a vision. We have a vision about a different economic structure. We can never eliminate poverty if we don't take seriously the need to dismantle capitalism. And there are beautiful models and ways in which people are thinking about how can we do this differently? The comrades in Jackson, Mississippi are building interdependent cooperative models of businesses where those and whoever participates in the labor and the work, they all share in the profits of that work, right? And capitalism will never allow that to happen. So we can't we can't be satisfied with just our one vote, because democracy, where we actually don't control it, is not rooted in our principles and values and African traditions, in my opinion. We will always see the gerrymandering, the lines, you know what I mean, closing up the shops so we can't vote. Those things will always happen. And and one more thing, the voting, and you also, friend, named if we could just have access to free market. You know, and as my story, I grew up under the impacts of the war on drugs. But the war on drugs also was happening in a time of super capitalism. The advancing of the neoliberal agenda, right? The deregulation, the privatization, the general society like, yo, we ain't got to help you. We'll privatize resources, you know what I mean, and let the charities take care of it. But we collectively, you know, allow those in power, particularly white men, you know what I mean, say, hey, we don't have to take care of each other no more. We'll make it a business. We'll put a price tag on and make it a business in order to take care of each other. And so I think part of our mandate is also being able to broaden our vision beyond a vote and access to materialism, right? And we have to hold, as Dr. King talked about, the three evils that we are up against: racism, militarization, and capitalism. We have to challenge ourselves to look beyond these borders to see how our struggles are connected with others. If we haven't quite developed a critique around what's happening in Israel right now, and we are not in solidarity with Palestine, understanding the apartheid that's happening there, but can mobilize to South Africa, we have to name our contradictions, right? And so the beautiful work of history, the beautiful work of the libraries that are sitting right here, is that we're able to read and the lessons and grow from it. The work y'all have done is critical, and without y'all there would be no us. And without y'all stories and lessons and honest read of all the contradictions, we will never advance a different vision for liberation. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mary. I just want to let her flow. I just want to let you keep flowing. And so you talked about the inside and outside game that we know is evident in the civil rights movement that continues today. Can you speak about some of the inside and outside strategies that perhaps were in existence during the civil rights movement that you employ today in the work that you do? And then how are you adapting those to the current challenges of our society?
Certainly, I would say that we see actively in some of the photos that we've looked through over the civil rights movement a room full of people listening to each other. A lot of the photos show a conversation that was being held and was being heard. And unfortunately, I do think that our younger folks can do a better job of listening and taking a step to just say, what have we heard? How can we move past that? I do think that listening is a critical skill of organizing, and that it's not only something that has been used in the civil rights movement, but is being used as an inside game of our oppressors. So I do not fully believe that we will take the same tools that were used to build the master's house to dismantle it. But I do believe that if we're able to see how in those systems where they have conglomerated power by listening to whoever it is that has that mantle and then acting from there, we might get a little bit further. We are quite dissented sometimes in our own inside strategy. And that's what makes it hard for, say, for example, an amazing bipartisan piece of legislation that a nice young legislator's been working on to die in the Rules Committee because of the contention between our own inside game working towards each other. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that my ears specifically are open, and I do think that there are other ears in this room or within our young movement that are open, and that we're taking notes. You know, if you look right now on the stage, both Mary and I are over here taking notes, trying to figure it out. And I thank y'all for having that civil rights truth that allows for you to speak from the gut. I hope that we will work towards listening and actually speaking from the gut. Thank you.
One of the things that I keep thinking I have to grab the mic. It's weird. I'm like, and can y'all hear? One of the things that comes up around some of the inside, outside, and then like the away, or like the things that we're trying to build, I think about the ebbs and flows of like how we asserted our ability to move an inside strategy, right? Post-Reconstruction. Massive black people like getting in office, like real dope, right? And then, you know, it gets wild, things happen, and then we see another wave of folk post the civil rights movement. Many folks stepping into that leadership role, creating the Black Caucus, right? And so I think that what is interesting is as we are seeing many of our ground game organizers ascend and move into the inside strategies, those who were still on the outside, primarily moving a black power struggle, were being murdered in the streets by the police. Were being political prisoners and being, you know what I mean? So it's interesting to see what happens when, and how do we respond when the outside game, who we should feel responsible to and connected to and on assignment for and with, is being slaughtered on the streets. What is the role of the inside game to navigate that, right? And I would think there's some learnings there that we don't hear enough about that. So curious, what's our role in position when we have the targeting of our movements, when we have folks on the inside, you know? And so I think nowadays, you know, there are still organizations that play critical roles in the inside game. There are many of us who take on policy fights, not because, Lord have mercy, we don't take on policy fights because we're like, if we could just change this policy, all will be right with the world. We take it on because the boot of oppression is on our people's neck. We have no choice but to engage it, right? Or else what, we leave our people to rot in cages? Or else we leave our children to continue to be miseducated? So I think we don't really have a choice, but we have to continue to build grassroots power of everyday people to be able to do all the things. And you know, that is the blessing and the curse of what it means to be in active resistance and to be conscious. I always say it is a blessing in these times to be black and to be conscious, to be clear about what our fight is, to be clear about who our targets and our enemies are and our oppositions are, and what it is we want, a blessing. And sometimes I think we just have to be a little more aligned with our inside and outside game and realize that folks who are on the inside are always on assignment,
Yes.
And when the moment we say pull out, it's time to go.
Yes, and so
Ambassador, you have a great story about the inside-outside game with Dr. King and Lyndon Johnson. Talk about leaving Lyndon Johnson trying to get a Voting Rights Act.
Well, yeah, because I think that we had a different narrative. And it was not that, in fact, the 30s was a period when there was an enormous amount of money and effort put forward by the left in the South, and it didn't get a response. We had a narrative that was basically religious. And, I mean, it sounds crazy, but when we sat down with Lyndon Johnson, it was, I think, the 16th or 17th of December, 1964. We were supposed to meet with him at 4 o'clock. We didn't get in till 7 o'clock. What we didn't realize till later was that McNamara and all of the hawks had been in there all afternoon trying to press Lyndon Johnson to send troops to Vietnam. So when we left, Lyndon Johnson kept saying, I want to do something on voting rights and on ending poverty, the Great Society, but right now I don't have the power. We just got a civil rights bill passed in July. It's less than 6 months. I don't have the power to go back to the Congress. We left there, and Dr. King said, I said, what are you going to do? I said, we really need a vacation. We can wait till after the election. He said, no. I said, well, what you going to do? He said, we're going to get the president some power. I said, huh? We're broke. We're poor. You 5 feet 6 inches tall, 165 pounds, and you going to get the president some power. And he ignored me. He just kept mumbling, we're going to have to get the president some power. Now, I was thinking politically. He was on a completely different plane, and it was a spiritual plane. 2 days after we got here, back home, Amelia Boynton and Fred Reese drive over from Selma. And they say, you got to come help us in Selma. Well, we had not thought of Selma. Bernard had been in Selma, but people, for the most part, had given up on Selma. And when Mrs. Boynton, who went to Selma at 19 in 1929 and voted in 1932, and by that time she was 60-something, she led a get-out-the-vote ride for Obama's second campaign at 104. And this is a woman who had been fighting, from 19 to 104 with no time off. And so we said, we have to go help her. Now, this is a kind of godly coincidence. Martin's wife and my wife were born and grew up 30 miles from Selma. We had our first date in Selma. I knew Selma. Ralph was from 40 miles down the other road. And Coretta, all of them came from that same area, and they really had a miserable childhood, all three of them. And Coretta and Jean probably more than Juanita, but long story short, you know what happened at Selma. But before the end of March, Lyndon Johnson was standing up in the Congress, introducing voting rights legislation and making his We Shall Overcome speech. Now, that kind of victory is inexplicable. We did not know what we were doing. In fact, I just realized that the march from Selma to Montgomery worked because it was a mistake. People showed up on the wrong day. We had scheduled it for the second Sunday in March. Everybody came on the 7th, but that was the first Sunday because of the leap year. And so Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy, none of the preachers were there, but the people were there. Now, the irony of it is that if Dr. King had been there, Lyndon Johnson would have sent the Justice Department down, and they would not have let Jim Clark and his folk go crazy. They did, and they did it on television on a Sunday afternoon when half of the world was looking at Judgment at Nuremberg, because we didn't have but 3 channels back then. And in 90 days, with no money, now, Jimmy Lee Jackson had given his life, and that was what provoked the march from Selma to Montgomery. But Jimmy Lee Jackson was not shot by the policeman. We found out later. Jimmy Lee Jackson was sold up by a black intern and was left in the hospital eating chicken and feeling good. 2 white doctors took him back into the operating room, gave him too much ether and killed him. And when the young intern came back and said, this boy needs oxygen, they said, get out of here, nigga, you'll be next. Now, I tell that story because we like to think that it's only uneducated people who are racist. And that educated people, when people learn better, that's the way they taught me. But this is a deep sickness in our society. But that sickness ended up creating a march from Selma to Montgomery and ended up ending a Voting Rights Act. Now, the kingdom did not come, but we ended up with 2 black federal judges in Alabama that made a big difference. And I've been in this struggle now almost 80 years. Because my daddy started with me when I was 4. Because the Nazis were on the corner of my house. And he said, look, these are sick people. You don't get angry with sick people. You don't get upset with them. And for God's sake, when you get angry and upset, the blood runs from your head to your fist and your feet, and you'll do something stupid. The best thing you got is your mind. So keep cool and let your mind function, and then you got a chance. Because he was 5'4". He said, you're not going to be any more than 5, 6, or 7. So you're not going to ever be able to beat anybody. You got to use your head. See, don't get mad, get smart. And that was the reason I got upset with the kids who went out in the street. They were not being smart.
You don't think I was being smart?
Not at all. That was a felony. We never had a felony in the whole time we were, because even though we didn't get along with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I mean, Thurgood Marshall used to get awfully upset with us. But I'm drawing a blank on a name.
The judge.
No, Jack Greenberg and
Constance Baker
Motley. She came down and she kind of mothered us along and took over, and she said, now look, we're not trying to tell you what to do, but what we want to know, you tell us what you're going to do, we'll tell you how to do it so we can get you out of jail. And so there was a conscious, thought-out strategy, and it's best to put it off a week and let the lawyers think about it and figure out how they're going to get you out of jail before you get in jail and get charged with something that kills the whole movement. The other thing is that expressway out there, even at 11 o'clock at night, even if it's a black driver who wants to stop, he's been asleep on the road for 6 hours, driving for 6 hours, he might not react in time, and there'd be needless deaths. And so I was really thanking the police officers, most of whom were black, who were in my neighborhood, who I trained and recruited, see, and have worked with since I took over in 1981. And the police chief, who was my security guy when I was mayor, said, our guys stayed up all night, and I said, they really did a good job. He said, would you come thank them? I had to go. And in thanking them, when they had stood up there and let people shout in their face and spit in their face and treat them, and they went to Booker T. Washington and Mays just like everybody else did. I mean, they were our local folk that are our police officers. And when they're treated badly like that, now we're short of police officers. We can't get people to be police officers. And so you got to think of the whole thing that that we had to deal with. Now, because I've been in this on all sides, I have a different point of view, but The only time Martin Luther King got mad with me was when I agreed with the young rabble-rousers. I said, okay, you all say I'm Uncle Tom. I'm ready to go. And Dr. King stopped the meeting, and he said, Andy, can you come to my office? And I said, sure. He said, what the hell are you doing? I said, I don't know. I'm tired of just arguing. He said, look, you're going to get me killed for nothing. And he said, if you're not going to take the extreme right position, and as far conservative as you can be, these guys are emotional. Jose had been killed. Jose had been in a foxhole, and everybody else had been killed but him. And he was trying to get himself killed from the Second World War on. He came back from Germany with a 40% disabled veteran in uniform and got water from a fountain that said white only, and got beat up by some white kids down in Bainbridge. And he decided that God saved him in Europe to give his life for his people here. So from 1960 on, he was trying to get himself killed. And I said, no, you don't have to go looking for the cross. It'll find you when it's your turn. But Dr. King said, look, I know they're after me, and I don't mind dying when my time comes, but I don't want to give my life over some foolishness. And you have to be the reasonable one, whether you like it or not. And if you're not, I don't need you. Go somewhere else. Get your job somewhere else. See? And it was that kind of, Bernard played that role with James Bevel. Now, you can say what you want. James Bevel was a genius, but he was certifiably insane. He had been discharged from the military for good reason, because when he was in the Navy and they tried to make him a cook, he said, no, I didn't come here to cook, I came here to fight. And he laid out on the back of the ship all day long and read, and he wouldn't pay any attention to him. So they gave him a dishonorable discharge, and he came to Nashville and joined the movement. And so we had really what we needed to succeed in our time. And we have problems here. But when we were dealing with this city, we had less than 1 million people. And it was because of our successes, because Maynard Jackson decided to build an airport. Frankly, not depending on the government, but saying, look, the government's got money, but the government has also got deficits. They're broke. If we wait on the government, we won't ever get an airport. Young guy from...
So the growth of the city has added to the challenges that...
No, but I'm saying
that
we went to Wall Street,
right, but
and became capitalists. But capitalists fed the hungry. Capitalists created that airport generates $50 billion every year. Half of the people who own and run those businesses are minorities and women.
And don't get living wages.
No, well, hold up. But I'm saying, hungry. But the owners, are there, and the owners, half of them are black.
Wouldn't it be really cool if it was a cooperative model in terms of who gets the profits and who owns
show
it?
me anywhere in the world that a cooperative model has existed.
But you did that, Ambassador Young, with the...
in Atlanta, Jackson, Mississippi,
You did
Detroit.
a lot of that with the Lakewood. You did it with the Shoeshine.
With Lakewood,
there's tons.
no, with the Lakewood Freeway,
right.
we did it.
And you're working on doing them as part of some of the food co-ops. But let's let the audience have an opportunity to. But I hope you heard Mary it was out of love and concern for you all that he and his granddaughter gave him holy hell for it.
So I think this
She
is
still does. Every time I
a
talk.
great time to transition. We've heard a lot from our
She's working
panelists.
with the Department
I
of
wonder
Labor,
what
with
questions
education
you
and
have
work.
in the audience, or what
that's the
insights you have from the things that you've heard today. I think we have microphones, or maybe these are the microphones that you need.
Do we have any cards? Do we have cards?
So I'll MC down here, pass the mic. So any questions down here from the floor? Yes. I'll go to the front and then come down.
Hello, my name is Ken Wainwright. I just want to say, Park, Hooks, I could go on all day about y'all. We love y'all. Thank you so much for everything that you guys are doing. Mr. Young, it was a pleasure meeting you at your birthday. And I know that it was an honor speaking about some of the issues in the black community that we've been facing for a long time. And one of the things that I noticed the most, that's been the most consistent, has been the lack of agenda. Atlanta has two jails. We know what it's filled with when it comes to African American males. And Mr. Young, I wanted to ask you, what needs to be on the agenda for African American men and women, particularly men, where the criminalization is high across the nation. Many of the kings are behind sales right now, and I wanted to ask, when it comes to decreasing that and increasing the education, increasing jobs, increasing, especially for African American men, what are the steps to move forward in doing that in the best way?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The only one you can really be responsible for is you. And so you have to be the best father you can be. You have to be the best person you can be. You have to be the best citizen you can be, the best churchman. And I mean, wherever you make yourself available, if you are doing the best that you can, my experience is that I have never planned one day to the next what I'm going to be doing. But just like we got plopped into Selma when we weren't thinking about Selma, I didn't want to be mayor here. I didn't want to run for Congress, but nobody else would run. And I didn't want to go to the UN. I wanted to stay in Congress. I have never been anxious to do anything but what I'm doing. And if you do what you're doing well today, you find yourself drafted or pulled or pushed into doing what needs to be done next. And one of my rules is, what I do is, if anybody else wants to do it and can do it, please take it and go ahead. I'm not that anxious to do anything but what I'm doing. But I keep getting, I mean, the Olympics came to me. And you don't run from it. You embrace it and make it the best that it can be. And so we raised $2.5 billion. We saw to it that minorities and women got 41% of that $2.5 billion, which was unusual back in the 90s. And we changed this city. All this downtown has been really revitalized because of the Olympics. Now, everybody, I mean, go into any of these hotels or office buildings, and you see black and white folk eating lunch. I don't know what they're being paid, but and it's certainly not perfect, but it's better than any place else I've been. And I've been to 152 countries in the world, and I haven't found any place better than Atlanta. And we are a long way to go, but we've done more with what we have than most folk.
Thank you, Ambassador Young. I wonder if Mary or Park would like to give a quick response, and then we'll take one more question from the floor. We do have a question or two that Andrea will read after that. And any additional responses?
Join the movement. Join the movement that allows our folks to get a sense of dignity, allows you to restore your self-respect, allows you to bring and move through a world with a politic that is aligned and rooted in Black queer feminism. Black men need to be feminists. We need that now more than anything. Black queer feminist. The homie Max, raise your hand back there. Get with that brother. Let him do a little talk, a little conversation, a little political education. But we need that in order to inform a right vision that puts us all in right relationship with each other. And being able to join the movement allows all people to fight for the world that we're trying to see and build and create. And I feel like that is one of the, you know, I could say, hey, go try to find a job, like go try to do da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, but our survival, the survival of Black men, the survival of Black trans men, all of them, right, is predicated on our ability to do collective work and take collective risks with each other. Joining the movement will allow that to happen. And so you may not have a gig, and that don't come with the promises of a paycheck or nothing like that, but it does come with the promise of dignity, comes with the promise of hope, right? And it comes with the promise of something bigger than yourself.
Thank you.
And I want to say to Mary's work that I first saw her on television. It was Mother's Day, and she was getting Black women out of jail for Mother's Day and raising money to make their bail. And just last month, Keisha Lance Bottoms and Felicia Moore passed legislation where if you have a misdemeanor, you should not be in jail just because you don't have money to make bail. So we are making change, and they are standing for that change.
We have a question from the floor.
My name is Odessa Hooker. I'm a mother of 5 children. For the last 48 years, a solo mom. To me, my job begins first taking care of them, and it did, and some of you know them now. But this is what I've learned in 87 years here. The most powerful tool in America is money. And I was never allowed to earn a lot of it, so I was very careful about how I spent it. But beginning of 2017, I decided I was no longer going to give any donation to any politician. They earn lots of money. And I've been getting messages from Nancy Pelosi and from Perez, and they even sicked John Lewis on me to see why I'm not giving them any money. And it's because I want to see them think about what my needs are. And my needs are I have 3 things that I want them to address. The first thing I want is an apology for slavery. The second thing I want is that it be addressed. We have built this country on our backs without the benefit of minimum wage. It is time we were repaid for it. I am not giving any more money to them until they address things I want. And the first reparation plank is the accurate rewriting and teaching of American history. If our people knew their history, we could get much more out of all of us.
Thank you. Park is our elected official. You want to take that one on?
That was an instruction. That was an instruction.
I'm so thankful for you being so raw and honest. I am newer to this work. I've been called to this work because I was asked to join in on the work. The sitting state legislator called me up one day when I was on MARTA and said, "Will you run for my seat? I'm resigning. I can't do it anymore. I'm exhausted." And so I picked up the torch and have been moving forward. I too agree with you. We all want a system that speaks to the reparations that we deserve. For the past 14 years, we have placed legislation in the Georgia State Capitol that is a resolution that urges our state to recognize that slavery happened. We had to move away from asking for an apology because for so many years, they were saying that was the reason why they wouldn't give us a hearing, because then they would have to provide reparations. So now we're in a model of, we'll just acknowledge it, and we still can't get a hearing. So I share the frustration with you, and I am working to try to do something about that. We deserve it, and it's not going to be something that I will let go of as it relates to the adequate addressing of the educational system and how skewed it has been. I cannot say it enough, the state of Georgia must invest in public education. We are diverting our funds right now. And it's frustrating. So I'm here with you to share the concern, and I thank you for what you said.
Let me make just a quick announcement. If anyone here parked in the CARE parking deck, it closes at 9:30. That's in about 15 minutes. So if you parked in the CARE parking deck, we don't want you to have to take Uber or Lyft home tonight. Though you could probably get a ride from somebody if that's necessary.
So quickly, is there a movement that is happening now? What's your hope for it? Just we do a lightning round to close out.
Nice and quick. The movement right now, youth leaders, we are rising up. We have invited so many of our older colleagues to walk out of their workplaces, worship spaces with us. As of yesterday, we walked out for gun violence. What I will say is on the 24th of this month, it's just 2 Saturdays away, young folks will be marching through the city of Atlanta from the Center for Civil and Human Rights to Liberty Plaza, which is in District 58. And I'm so honored to be there with them. As the young folks, we have always agitated and resisted, and we are actively doing it now. So I invite you, if your young folks don't want to come or can't come on March 24th, please sign them up to be pages at the state capitol. They can come and join me for a day and make copies for me and be flies on the wall and really get to the bottom of how our youth can continue to rise.
Mary?
Oh gosh, I'm like, to do. I would say, yes, the movement is very alive and well. And so we don't have the power of money, but we do have the power of people. And so we must organize ourselves. So that means we have to join an organization. It's time out for, individual running around doing whatever. No, join an organization. Get committed. Get accountable to a set of people with a shared vision, politics, that you can be in principle struggle with. For those who are working an inside game, take up the Vision for Black Lives Policy platform, which was crafted by, I would say, hundreds of organizations participated in developing that policy platform. And that's and there's model policies that folks can have access to say, this is, when we're moving policy, this is the lens in which we should be doing that. And I would also say, locally, we are underway in terms of continuing to end the fight and to abolish cash bail. And so we are doing an event. Olivia sedated, we're doing a political education. The 23rd, 24th. Talk to this one here afterwards. I'm going to have to run out, but talk to this one afterwards. We're doing a community political education so folks can understand what this ordinance has done and what it doesn't, and what it hasn't done, and what we're still fighting for, and also what it is we're trying to build in the city, and shift our hearts and minds around how we deal with harm, how we approach harm differently, and how we envision a world that doesn't put our people in cages, because we know it don't work. So join that train if you're into it. And I'll leave some of my cards and some stickers over here or something.
And Mary, you probably should go.
What time is it?
She's got to catch a plane to New Orleans where she's speaking
Oh, I have
tomorrow.
to leave, friends. I love y'all. Appreciate you. Enjoy. Struggling with you. Thank you. Pleasure, friend. See you later. Come back.
The struggle continues. And organizations are important, but these kids that are marching now are fulfilling part of Martin Luther King's prophecy that unearned suffering is redemptive, that 17 of their members were killed, and this is their response to that suffering. They didn't ask for it. The kids in Birmingham didn't ask for it. There were 62 bombings in the 61, 62. Fred Shuttlesworth's church was bombed 3 times in 1961 and 62, and that's what made the Birmingham movement. And the response, though we were there with them and training them, the response was overwhelmingly high school young people. Now, the movement is not just in the streets. The movement, I'm serious that Black Panther, that earned $1 billion in a little over a month, 80% of it was shot here, I think. Yes. The audience was only 37% black in the first round, which is saying that there is a cultural revolution that's going on, and that all white folk are not like the ones that get in the news, and that overwhelmingly those kids at Parkland were overwhelmingly white, few blacks and few browns, and you don't know who's gay and who's straight, and it's nobody's business. Whatever they have come together, they're focused on the evil that took their classmates, which is guns. And that is their struggle, but they will evolve into other struggles. And every life is a struggle, and you can do it wherever you are just by being the best that you can be and being open and honest and friendly with people around you who are different.
Dr. Lafayette, is there a movement?
Yes, and that's why you see this smile on my face. And I'm going to stay on my medication. I want to see what's going to happen next.
He means his blood pressure medication.
Here's my specific proposal. Now that we've gotten these young people up and moving, we've got to keep moving. Because a movement is not just a protest or a march or a walkout. Martin Luther King says that when you capture the media for 10 days in a row, the headlines, you got your movement. So what you've got to do is put together a strategy that will capture, the headlines. Now, the next thing that must happen, and I'm proposing this, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to propose it. Now that you got all of these students, guess what? Every one of these schools that we see across the nation, and we just left those in Tucson, they are moving. And they have nonviolent trainers with the leadership. That's the thing that was so fascinating. We've got to give them the training that we got when we went to the movement in Nashville. It's no coincidence that all those leaders came out of Nashville. Jim Lawson trained them. Martin Luther King came to Nashville. You know what he said when he spoke to us? He said, I came not to bring inspiration. I came to gain inspiration. This is what he said to us as students in the first 3 months of the movement. You know why? Because in 3 months, we desegregated all of our lunch counters. And guess what else we desegregated? The lunch counters at the Greyhound bus station. Yeah, in Nashville in 1960. okay? And you don't desegregate the lunch counters without desegregating the restroom. You gotta have a restroom if you got lunch counters. And the waiting room, okay? So the whole bus station was desegregated. So when the Freedom Rides came, okay, yeah, they went right straight on through. All right? They didn't have any problem in Nashville. Then they got back on their segregated bus and went all the way to Montgomery, Alabama, to a segregated bus station in Montgomery, Alabama in 1961. And guess what? The people who came to the bus station to get on a segregated bus came on an integrated local bus because the buses were desegregated in 1956 in Montgomery. Look for cracks. Final point. Look at all these politicians up here, elected officials, running, catch planes and do things, okay? Here, we got the federal judge sitting out there, okay? All that, black folks, okay? Guess what? Suppose all of these high schools that we're talking about, and by the way, the middle schools are on the way. Did y'all know that? Yeah, some started already, yeah. Now, suppose you get all these young people, since all of them are in congressional districts and they're in legislative districts, because all those schools, you know, they're geographically located. Suppose you create a youth legislature. Yeah, okay? A youth from 12 to 17 years old, and they elect their officials and replicate the same kind of structure we have in the legislature. Since they don't teach civics in schools anyway, how are they going to know how to go about participating in government? And that's what we call a democracy. So let them have their own party, and once a month, and bring their voter registration card, and they can get goodies, and you can cook them some nice desserts and stuff like that, and have a party, it's a cake, you know, and then you can invite a real elected legislator there every month, you know, maybe one or two, and find out what they're doing to represent, okay, that district. And then get the students to vote. They can actually vote, and they become legislators themselves and start proposing bills that they want to see. And guess what? Every month you got a whole new, okay, turnover of those turning 18. They're actually going to be voting. And see, some of them going to start running for office for real, like they did. Huh?
Well, with those words of hope and inspiration, thank you all for joining us today. You have
Give me one little sentence. Before I started with the movement, I had never read Black Reconstruction. I didn't know anything about Sheikh Anta Diop, African origins of civilization. That getting involved made me need to know things and made me start to want to understand things that I didn't know. And I think that part of what you cannot wait for anybody else, there's a Sanskrit saying that Frederick Douglass is a good example of. As a slave, he didn't wait for anybody to teach him how to read. He taught himself how to read. He started the Freedmen's Bank, no help, hardly. And we almost have to take responsibility for educating ourselves and learning what we think we need to know. And because it's a constant struggle, and nobody's really going to look out for your interests as well as you will.
Well, thank you all. Thanks to our panel. And we hope you find this as food for thought and inspiration. And I'd like to leave you with words that Martin Luther King spoke when he was celebrated in Atlanta for receiving the Nobel Prize. And he said, we ain't what we used to be. We ain't what we ought to be. We ain't what we gonna be. We ain't what we wanna be. But thank God we ain't what we was. So with that, good night. There's punch and cookies downstairs, so please join us and join our panel.